8 rappers who have been on Joe Rogan's podcast. Joe Rogan, much like Joe Budden, is another media personality who was able to revitalize and rebrand their career through creating a podcast. A stand-up comedian by trade, but probably best remembered for his time as the host of Fear Factor and as a lovable but bro-y commentator for the UFC, Rogan jumped onto the podcast bandwagon early, launching his show in 2009. Today, the podcast is one of the most successful and viewed shows in the history of the medium. As a result, Joe has been able to feature an array of impressive guests, from Jamie Foxx to Edward Snowden. A fan of all things pop culture, Rogan has also featured a variety of rappers, and despite rap not being his favorite genre, he's been able to have some pretty interesting combos with hip-hop heads. Before we tell you what your favorite rapper revealed on their appearance on the show, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Number 8. Be Real. Younger audiences may not immediately recognize Be Real as one of the founding members of Cypress Hill, the rap group that helped shape West Coast rap in the early 1990s. They may know him, however, as the host of the YouTube series The Smoke Box, which features the rapper and his guest discuss life as they smoke an increasing amount of marijuana in Be Real's car. Be Real is a legitimate marijuana activist, lobbying for the legalization of marijuana, so he and Rogan discuss the drug's role in America and the government's changing legalization. Beyond this, they talk about Cypress Hill's rise to fame as the first successful Latino rap group, and even the Flat Earth conspiracy. During this, Be Real posits the theory that conspiracy theories like Flat Earth are planted by the government in order to discredit more realistic conspiracy theories. Be Real is an extremely articulate and engaging guest, and surprisingly enough, neither Joe or Be Real light up even once. They did remedy this, however, when soon after Rogan appeared as a guest on Be Real's show Smokebox. Number 7. Immortal Technique. Immortal Technique was featured on the Joe Rogan podcast a number of times, from 2012 to 2014. But perhaps his most engaging appearance took place in 2014. Technique's appearances on the podcast usually comprised of him talking about various political or social issues. But in this episode, the rapper decided to share his experience with the Church of Scientology, much to Rogan's amusement. Immortal Technique recalls how he was in need of a job after being released from prison, and found himself applying for a position at the Church of Scientology. After being quizzed on the video, he decided not to pursue the job further. The two continue to discuss the tax-free status of Scientology and how it relates to organizations like the NFL and the NHL. The entire podcast is incredibly interesting, and the two do go on to discuss other subjects, including super advanced aliens creating the Earth, Vince Foster's mysterious death, and how Andy Kaufman influenced comedy. This particular episode covers a lot of ground, and might be one of the best episodes of the podcast's run. Number 6. Mac Lethal. Mac Lethal is a rapper better known for his YouTube videos than actual music, originally gaining attention after the viral success of his Tumblr blog, Texts from Bennett. Mac went on to create a series of YouTube videos based around his impressive fast rapping skills, having amassed 40 million views. During Mac's appearance, they talk at length about his book Texts from Bennett, based off his popular website, as well as his viral success. They explore some of Mac's creative process for thinking up new videos, and spend some time delving into the story behind Mac's now famous video, in which he parodies "Look at Me Now" while drinking alcohol and making pancakes. The two continue to talk about everything imaginable, from Joe's relationship with his parents to the way social media paints our perspective of the world. After his initial appearance, Joe Rogan later shouted out Mac during a podcast in 2018 while talking about the speed of his raps. In response, Mac Lethal dropped a playful diss aimed at Joe, asking to come back on the show so he could perform this diss and, quote, set the record straight. Number 5. Wiz Khalifa. Wiz Khalifa's appearance on Joe Rogan might be the episode that illustrates the perfect blueprint for what a typical Joe Rogan podcast is. The duo talk about all of Joe's favorite subjects, marijuana, martial arts, and do plenty of Google image searches about niche topics. Though Wiz is notorious for his smoking habits, and Wiz does smoke throughout the podcast, the two don't spend much time discussing that topic, instead discussing in length Wiz Khalifa's dramatic physical transformation through his martial arts training and changes to his diet. In a standout moment, Joe engages in a tangent where he speculates about a future in which humans use flight as everyday transport, and theorizes how a flight traffic system would work. Wiz shares some some interesting stories about his childhood and how he fell into the rap game, stating he either wanted to be a Ninja Turtle or a rapper ever since he was in 3rd grade. Wiz reminds the world just how charismatic he is, as he effortlessly moves between personal stories and musing about rap in general. Number 4. Action Bronson. Action Bronson is a man of many talents. His career began as a chef before he found success as a rapper, and then found himself coming full circle with his Viceland TV show, F That's Delicious. So it's no wonder that Joe Rogan might want to talk with a personality that has seen many corners and facets of the world, and managed to maintain his larger-than-life persona. Both known for their love for marijuana, it was no surprise that the duo would smoke when Action visited Joe in 2017. However, Joe went on to marvel about Action's THC tolerance, saying that he was the heaviest smoker that he had ever seen in person. And though Joe smoked a little bit during their conversation, Action continued with little pause. During their conversation, the two would have an array of hilarious moments, talking about everything from food to the ranking of Adam Sandler movies. In one particularly standout moment, the two discuss future career prospects for celebrity chef Guy Fieri, eventually settling on a member of Nickelback or Smash Mouth. Number 3. RZA. RZA is widely known as the leader of the Wu-Tang Clan, the famous rap group who made a career of mafioso-laced raps, and a love for everything related to Kung Fu and Shaolin. But RZA also has a softer side, which he was happy to explore when he sat down with Joe Rogan. After an in-depth conversation about both of the men's relationships with alcohol, RZA turned his sights on veganism. Having been a vegan for over 20 years, RZA goes on to explain that his choice was rooted in animals' rights, and feels that animals don't need to die for him to live. Perhaps the most fascinating part of the podcast, however, was RZA's analysis on the lineage of hip-hop. He explains how the art form was born from the youth culture of America at the time, and integrated input from every race. He dubs the genre as an inclusive American art form, and talks about his pride for the way rap has evolved. It's an interesting take on rap's lineage, and a must-watch for any rap fan who wants to better understand the history of hip-hop, from someone who has lived it. Number 2. Killer Mike. Besides being one half of the hip-hop duo Run the Jewels, Killer Mike is known as a hip-hop historian, and one of the most articulate and vocal voices for political reform in hip-hop. So when he sat down with Joe Rogan in 2019, there was a lot for the two to talk about. Their conversation, which just exceeded 3 hours, touched on a little bit of everything, from Mike's weight to his new Netflix show Trigger Warning, all the way down to dissecting the nuances of street gangs and their role in the lives of youth on the street. In typical Killer Mike fashion, the rapper offered a thoughtful explanation for street gangs, asserting that they often arise because youth in underdeveloped areas have no other activities, skills, or resources, and the gang is the only source of fraternity and belonging they can find. He posits that these kids may be enterprising enough to help their community if they were given the proper resources. Mike even manages to get Rogan to reflect on his own political action, as Rogan explains how he and a friend raised money for pygmies in the Congo, and Killer Mike humorously reveals his fear of contracting malaria. Number 1. Kid Cudi. Though the Joe Rogan podcast is known for its lighthearted banter and Joe Rogan's love for having Google images pulled up, Kid Cudi's appearance on the podcast was a surprisingly honest, sincere, and sometimes tender look into the rapper who doesn't do many interviews.
It's just a random Tuesday, and there's some kid in Minnesota that's like, yo, I fucking love you, dude. Keep going. We're listening. And I might have needed to hear that day. You know, so like, those kids don't know that that means that much to me.
Cudi appeared on the podcast and opened up to Rogan about everything from his struggles with addiction and depression to his creative process. Perhaps one of the most interesting tidbits from the entire podcast was when Cudi spoke on how he composes a song, revealing that he has no set process and that it, quote, comes different every time. It's a fascinating look into Cudi's mind, who is known as a bit of a loner and often stays away from social media and the spotlight. Not the whole podcast is filled with dark introspection, however. The two riff about a variety of topics, including their feelings on the show The Walking Dead. Cudi even ends the podcast with a hilarious story about running into Wiz Khalifa while he was high on shrooms, revealing that Wiz has a deep fear of using acid. What do you wish Cudi had talked about on the podcast that he didn't touch on? Who is your favorite rapper to appear on the Joe Rogan podcast? Let me know in the comments. And before you leave, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to our channel.